best to fill our time with a good understanding of what the Bible says relative to the topic at hand. At the same time, want to leave opportunities for discussion as we are, in fact, dealing with a topic that is so fundamental and basic to our existence, not only from the standpoint that the Lord has the whole world in His hand, the whole universe is in His hand, by His very word and the power of His word, He spoke the universe into existence, and of course we know that a lot of people have a hard time with that, and so what we're doing is trying to approach it from a biblical standpoint as well as a logical standpoint. And when it comes to the study of God's word, then we have to approach it just like we would anything else, and that is approach it in a reasonable and a rational way. When we make determinations about various things in life, we usually do not do like, I remember one test that was being taken to get into officers training school in the Marines on Gomer Pyle, is that here was Sergeant Carter. He was taking the test, and he, of course, was hopeful to get the lieutenant job or whatever it was. And then here's Gomer, and he's sitting over there, and they're all true and false statements. And so he's hitting his hand on the desk, and if that finger tingled, it was true, and if that finger tingled most, it was false. And he ended up beating Sergeant Carter. Well, that's obviously not the rational way to approach a test. We demand, at least we should, some evidence to lead us to a conclusion, and that evidence, of course, is only as good as the one who provides it. Now, as we live here in this world today, then we know there are many established facts scientifically, and of course, there's absolutely nothing that the Bible addresses that is not in perfect accord with scientific fact. It's when you get into that area of theory that you end up having a problem. And sadly, it's been the case for way too long, if it never was right. It's been the case for far too long that people feel as though it's demanded of them that they compromise what the Bible says in order to accommodate the so-called scientific arena, when that's completely false. Who in the world do you think is behind all scientific theory and scientific fact anyhow? Well, it's God. He is the one that's been here forever. There's never been a period of time in which God didn't exist, and thus God has the right to tell us just exactly what we need to know so that we can live in harmony with His will here, and then we can enjoy an eternity in heaven one day. And He's given us sufficient evidence to lead to that obvious conclusion, and that's what we've been looking about as we not only explore God's world, but more specifically learning about God's book or God's word. What was the one point that we made relative to God's book that is the greatest catastrophe that could happen to a Bible? Throw it in an incinerator? No. Don't use it. Don't use it. Don't read it. Don't study it. That's the worst thing that we could possibly do with the Bible. And of course, we know that over time, there are all types of individuals, at least in times past, who love to have a great big old Bible sitting on the coffee table. I don't even know if coffee tables are in the norm anymore, But at one time, people had big old family Bibles and you'd look at them, and they'd been sitting there and been dusted for week after week after week, but very seldom were they ever opened. Well, that's the travesty that faces us because we really do not know what the Bible teaches, and thus, when it comes to questions about the origin of man, then we don't know what God has told us about that. And if we don't know what God has told us about anything, then we are in the worst position of ignorance, because God wants us to know. He wants us to take Him at His word. And He wants us to examine the evidence that will lead us to conclude that He's been telling us the truth the whole time. There has never been a period of time that truth would need to hide from honest investigation. Truth will do just fine if you'll just turn it loose and let it defend itself. But when you set the truth aside and act as if we don't want to get into that anymore because we believe this over here, then you're going to end up with the catastrophes that we've seen happen in this country explicitly over the last few years. When you got men saying they're really women trapped in a man's body, or a woman that says she's a man trapped in a woman's body, all these different things. And all the problems that have occurred when people just simply fly in the face of truth, fly in the face of reality. I mean, I'm not concerned about something that's not reality, something that's not actual, something that's not the truth. If we allow people to have their own quote-unquote truth, then we're going to end up with objective contradictions that simply cannot sustain honest investigation. Your truth is this, and my truth is this, and our truth doesn't have to be the same truth. That's hogwash, friends. We don't accept that in any area except in the most important area, and that is where we came from and where we're going. In that area, as it relates to our spiritual well-being, both now and eternally, then for some reason, we don't look at truth the same way. Am I saying that spiritual truth is in the same category as mathematical truth? Absolutely so. Or any other truth. Truth always runs in parallel lines. It never contradicts other truth. If there's a contradiction, then something ain't true. That's why you'll never find a contradiction between scientific truth and mathematical truth. It'll always run parallel to each other. And if you've got a contradiction, then obviously something's being missed. Something's not being understood. And so we need to understand that as we approach God's Word. And then we looked, and we're having to combine a little bit. We're going to be trying to be called back up by next week, exploring the first 4 days of creation, and then day 3, we're going to be looking today more at plants, and then we're also going to pull in a little bit relative to what happened on day number 5 with 2 different sets of animals, okay? Now here's a question that'll give us some opportunity to think, hopefully, and hopefully you've done a little bit of thinking along these lines, and, and more than just a cursory view of things. But here's the first question that we posed in our set of questions. How are plants important, and I've, in addition to important, for some reason put essential, because I think we could say that too, to we who populate the earth. And then I started looking at that and I said, wait a minute, I'm trying to speak with proper English and I probably didn't do it right there. Yeah. And I started looking at it and said, was that supposed to be to we who, or is that supposed to be to us who, or is it supposed to be to us whom, or is this? So anyhow, this is what I came up with. Final analysis. How are plants important? They produce food. They use and produce oxygen, obviously so. And that's just 2 little quick points. Maybe a good question to ask would be, why did God create plants to begin with? You know, now these are all examples of things that are beneficial to mankind, but why did he do it to begin with? Have you ever thought about what the earth would look like if there was no such thing as plants? You know, we're having a catastrophe that's still happening evidently over in California with wildfires and all that. And you'll be following that kind of information of here all this cleaning of the forest floors was not being done, and trying to protect the natural growth of plants and all that, and then that's kindling, and then this gone, and here's houses gone, and all that. And then somebody says, well, we need an absence of all this wind that's causing this to happen. We need people to quit starting fires, obviously. But sometimes it wasn't fires that were started, and I've seen live on my television, here's gigantic flames, and they're hopping across roads and going everywhere. And then somebody says, well, we need a little bit of rain. And I think, well, a little bit of rain? Man, you need a whole bunch of rain. They say, no, we don't need a whole bunch of rain. We just need a little bit of rain. Why? Oh, all right. If you have a whole lot of rain and you've killed all the vegetation, burned all the vegetation up, then you're going to have all types of mudslides. And we've seen that happen in some of these same places that are dealing with fire. When they get an abundance of rain, of course, you know, at some point in time, you have to question the intelligence of people who will build their houses in such a way that they're susceptible to those things anyhow. And you wonder why in the world would insurance companies pull out of California, and then you begin to look at what's happened, you say, well, no wonder. If I had money and stock in an insurance company in which they were not allowed to raise their rates because of some type of government control, and here they are sitting on a tinderbox, or they're fixing to slide down a side of a mountain into the ocean, then no wonder they couldn't make money there. They couldn't sustain themselves because of that. So obviously, if it wasn't for plants, there would be terrible erosion. When we first moved to the beautiful Sequatchie Valley back in 1964, I saw something that was growing on the side of the road going to Chattanooga that I never had seen before. Reckon what that was? Kudzu. Kudzu. And what was the purpose for this foreign species of plant to be brought into the United States of America, even on to Signal Mountain? What was that for? Help with erosion. And then, lo and behold, it wasn't very long after they transplanted the plant and to deal with the erosion problem, they said, man, erosion is a whole lot better than this stuff growing everywhere. It's taking over the power lines. It's growing everywhere. But, obviously, there is something to be said for the root system of plants that allows the dirt and the mud to not be washed away. So if you didn't have plants in the world, then you'd just have a big muddy mess all the time, all across the globe. You'd have constant winds that were blowing soil from one section to another. You'd have something like we had in the Dust Bowl back in the 30s and in the 40s. If you've never seen a documentary, and this is one documentary on PBS that I could vouch for as being good and accurate to as much information as I can get on it. What happened during the Dust Bowl was absolutely amazing. I guarantee you've never even thought of the devastation that took place. It was so terrible. And the reason why it took place was the very thing that we're talking about here. It was over-tilling the land to where there was nothing that was holding the soil together. And so when the winds came, it blew away thousands and thousands, if not millions, of acres. And some of those prairie grasses that were growing over in that area at the time, they would have a root system down into the ground up to 6 feet. But when it's tilled, then it just blows away. And it was amazing how many people died from dust pneumonia. Little babies died from dust because they were breathing that stuff. And that's when some people in my family, I remember, when they put anything in a cabinet or they put anything on a shelf inside the kitchen, it was always turned upside down. And that was a holdover from when you could not allow anything to catch dust because you're going to be eating it anyhow. And so those are situations that and what was amazing concerning the Dust Bowl at that time was that the federal government had to get involved and said, quit doing this to the land. You can't do this. You can't keep on doing it. Well, why was they doing it to begin with? Making money. Absolutely. It was all about the money. It was all about being able to make more wheat to ship and make more money coming in. And so here they were involved in doing all this plowing and all this planting that ended up destroying the land. Now, that's not good stewardship, is it? Of course not. And so the federal government stepped in and said, you can't do that anymore. But guess what happened? 10 years later, they started doing it again. That love for the almighty dollar caused them to just not worry about future generations or even about their own families being able to live through dust bowls. It was so terrible. So God knew that there was a need for something to hold the soil together. And of course, he gave us plants to do just that. As a matter of fact, one quotation I read, if the earth would be one big ball of dirt and mud, the wind would blow sand around uncontrollably like it does in the desert. Rain would cause continuous mudslides in hilly and mountainous regions. We could say that God, in his infinite wisdom in planting, knew that the earth would need plants to control erosion, damaging winds, and blowing sands. And then, of course, as Faye said, provide oxygen, because that's what we need to live, while plants need carbon dioxide. Isn't it amazing that we provide carbon dioxide and plants provide oxygen for us? Pretty good arrangement. Isn't it amazing how that just happened? Isn't it amazing how that just all fell into place somehow? And we got plants and they give off, and we give carbon. Wow, what an accident, so much so good for us. And at the same time, we end up being able to eat apples and eat pears, and we got beans and taters and tomatoes, and we got wood, and we got paper, and we got maple syrup, and we got all these type of medicines, and we got everything from those plants that God created for us to be able to use. Now, here's the thing. All those things just miraculously, somehow through the process of time with billions and billions of years, those things just happened, or God created them that way. It's got to be one or the other, you know. There was a number of years ago, not long after we moved back to Dunlap, there was a discussion taking place in Chattanooga Times. I think it was back when there were two papers in Chattanooga, and I believe this one was in the Times at the time, because it used to be Times and Free Press, and still they was combined. But there was an argument going on, and there was a professor from over at UTC, and he was constantly in his articles, his commentaries on Sunday in the big newspaper, of course, he was ridiculing the whole concept of a creator God, an intelligent being that brought the world into existence and all that. And he was talking about the facts that had been established in evolution and all. And so I sat down, and I'm not a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some things that you simply cannot explain if you believe in evolution. And so I put together, I thought, a good little concise letter to the editor, and they sent it back. Said it had too many words in it. So I cut it down some words and then sent it back and said, we're not discussing that anymore. You know, but all it was this. And the evolutionists cannot answer simple questions like this. According to evolution, either a non-human being gave birth to a human being, or, and this is the only other possibility, or a non-human somehow was transformed into a human. Now that means, that second point means that here is a non-human, ape-like creature, fell down out of the tree, and he's walking along, and as he steps up his foot to take another step, he's a monkey, and then as he puts his other foot down, he's a human. Somebody says, well, that's crazy. I believe so too. Well, the only other possibility is then that a non-human gave birth to a human. When did that happen? And then what they continually say, and what we've expressed in this study already, they say, well, you don't consider the time involved. It don't matter if you got 10 zillion years. At some point in time, that had to happen. One of those things had to happen. Either a non-human gave birth to a human, or a non-human was transformed. Presto changeo, ape, human. When it happened? Now you can argue about how many billions of years take place, but at some point in time, in all that time, that had to happen. Which one is it? Do you know that's a question that they've never answered? All they can do is throw time at it, as if time is all that's necessary for the impossible to take place. Well, that's ridiculous. And yet we're supposed to believe that, and our kids are supposed to believe that, and that's what they're told oftentimes at school without any explanation from the other side of the equation, which is the truth side of the equation. At some point in time, those things had to happen. Which one? And I challenge you, the next time somebody spouts off about how that evolution has been proven to be so, when we got here from a big bang, ask them that question and let me know what their answer is. I know what their answer will be, because they can't be answered. All they can do is throw a bunch of time at it as if that is the answer to all the problems that we have in trying to support the theory of evolution.
Well, I understand is ape and human have different DNA.
Exactly. Our DNA is supposedly closer to animals that we don't think of as being human-like. But the fact of the matter is that, do what? It's still different. It's still different. And that's going to come up here in one of our other answers here too. What's something else in addition to all the things that we listed? I've wrote down a few more. Medicines, paint comes from vegetation, clothing. You know, the best clothing there ever was made is cotton, obviously. You can make rope out of different plants. And even homes sometimes are provided for animals by vegetation. And if you don't believe so, go out and cut a tree down and you see how much it's eat up. Somebody's living there until it ends up falling down. Any other thing on number one there? Do what?
Make ethanol out of it.
Absolutely. Get ethanol out of it. I like that. I don't like it in my gas, but I know there's something good from it. Yes, sir?
I was going to say that I think one of the biggest issues with, recognizing the biblical view of creation and just coincidental evolution is the significance of purpose. I like Psalm 104 where it says, "You cause the grass to grow for the livestock and plants for man to cultivate, that he may bring forth food from the earth." And it's like the evolutionists, they might recognize there's some coincidental uses that we can get out of creation, but it's not a
Purpose.
like here's why. There's not a why.
Exactly.
Well, this is a happy circumstance.
Yeah.
And not just for plants, but for the purpose of humanity.
Sure.
That's why we have so much hopelessness in the world, because people they don't recognize the purpose.
Exactly. When you take purpose away from anything, then all that's left is hopelessness. Yes, Tracy?
I was just thinking, science actually proves how, just awesome God is. I mean, he created the sun first. The plants need the sun. All of his processes that he made for our planet, he did them in a order so that it all works.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly. And to think that the alternative is an explosion that resulted in pure chance, as Daniel's talked about, and it all worked out so well. I've got earmarked an article I want to read soon that I found. It says, "Why did Earth get all the good stuff?" Why did that happen? Reckon it's got anything to do with who God put on Earth to populate it? Why did we get all the good stuff? Why didn't Mars and Venus, and why didn't they get all the good stuff we got? Why is this so hot? Why is this cold? Why? It's almost like it was designed that way, didn't it? Well, of course it is. There's a purpose behind everything God did. Now, at some point in time, you have to say, well, why did he make poison ivy and poison oak? Well, he had a reason for it. Guarantee you that. Why do you, I say that may have been a part of the fall, That's when Johnson grass was started, not throwing off any Johnson, That's when all the weeds and the thorns came about, make it more difficult to live. Yes, Charles?
Yeah, I was thinking, when I'm working in my garden, down on my knees, pulling them right weeds, I'm thinking about Adam. Just think about what God said about it. You can have it now by the sweat of your brow.
Exactly.
But if there wasn't no weeds, there wouldn't be no problem about me having the sweat.
Absolutely. And that just shows you the end result of sin entering the world and how things got more difficult just because people didn't seek to follow God's bidding. And it happens like that every day too. Why do we need a speed limit? Come on, people. Everybody's smart enough to know or not. Why do we got laws against stealing? Well, nobody's going to steal. Well, we got laws, and why does God have laws about running around with somebody else's spouse? Nobody's going to do that. Well, they will do, see? So,
Part of the reason, of course, God put man in the garden to tend it. And just like we see in California, if you don't give it the proper attention, then you get what you get.
yeah,
And so their neglect through their so-called wisdom, let's just let it be like it is, was neglect and destroyed.
exactly. The whole principle of stewardship. If man is given stewardship of the earth, and he is, then being a good steward means that you take precautions to maintain what you want to maintain. I mean, they got all upset when some of those hundreds and hundreds of years old trees were burning down, and yet their worship of the planet resulted in them not cleaning up the forest that would have preserved those old trees. If you're worshiping the the earth, Gaia is your God, and you've bought into the whole spiel about global warming and green energy and all that garbage, then you're going to do dumb stuff like that. And then when you have enough people, then you're going to set up a situation where catastrophes like that happen. It's going to happen more and more and more. And it truly is a religion. I mean, that's what evolution is. Atheism is a religion devoid of facts and contrary to established facts, scientific facts. So it shouldn't really surprise us when man follows his own devices and his own ideas, and it's in opposition to the will and the ways of God, then problems are going to result. And we see that each and every day of our lives for sure. All right, number 2, real quick. Wow. Evolution says that plants came to life from a steamy body of water that appeared accidentally, and that over millions and millions of years, plants moved by wind or water onto the land. If this is true, there should be fossils of those times when plants were changing, that is, these intermediate life forms, but there's no evidence of that. According to the Bible, God created all kinds of plants in one day, and he created all the plants full grown. That's pretty significant, isn't it? Now, why would we say that not only did the Bible tell us that God created all the plants on one day, but he created them full grown? How do we know that to be the case? He spells it out in detail, doesn't he? He says the seed is already in the plant. Now, wait a minute. You mean here is a plant that is only a few short minutes old and it's already able to reproduce itself? There's already apples on it to eat. There's already oranges, tangerine, whatever it is. There's already edible fruit on there. How'd that happen? And of course, that gets into the last section that hopefully you read here in a few minutes relative to the appearance of age. How did Adam look 2 seconds after he was created? How did he look? He was full grown. He wasn't a little bitty baby. He was full grown, capable of reproducing. Same with Eve. That's right. He didn't call him boy. That was Tarzan's kid. Yeah. So God created everything full grown. And again, of course, let's go to the next one real quick. Well, this is not in the lesson, but what is a fossil anyhow? Because here we talked about and mentioned fossils in the previous question. What is a fossil? Well, here's the dictionary definition of it. It comes from a Latin word, fossus, and literally means having been dug up. Oh, okay. So what fossils are the preserved remains or indentation of animals, plants, and other organisms from the past. So have there been, well, I mean, we all know there's been animals that have gone extinct. Is there such thing as plants that's gone extinct as well? Well, sure they are. Sure they have. And so we know they existed, not because we got a picture of them, but in some instances the fossil record gives us something like a picture of plants that have long gone extinct. And when something goes extinct, isn't it amazing that oftentimes you'll see where this extinct animal has been caught off the coast of Australia, which leads to the conclusion, hey, it wasn't extinct. If it was extinct, then why did we catch one off the coast of Australia? See? Or why did we find this frog living in some jungle somewhere when we never had seen it before and we thought it'd gone extinct? Because we were limited in our capacity to know everything's going on everywhere all at the same time. God's the only one who can do that. So when something goes extinct, that means that the last of that species has died. What causes plants and animals to go extinct? What are some things that could contribute to that? Do what? Humans. We could fish out. We could kill out. We could do all kinds of things. We could pick out. If you've got limited area in which certain species of plants or animals live, and then the people that are in that area decide to get everything that's there, then that could pretty well wipe out that particular. Remember what happened in the United States of America, according to history books that are pretty accurate on this regard, I believe, relative to the buffalo. You know, or the bison. And there's an argument anywhere. There, what you call it, a buffalo or a bison. It should be a bison probably. Buffalo's over in Africa.
We still got some of them, but there was, what was that, pigeon or something that had millions of them, we killed them out?
All the pigeons. There used to be, I can't remember the name of them now, but there's been all types of hazards that's happened to the world of animals and plants by the toxicity of maybe the land, maybe through overfishing, overhunting, changes in environment, all types of things. And of course, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, relative to kudzu, then there was, at some point in time, I remember in the last 50 or 60 years, they were trying to find some type of beetle that would kill all the kudzu, because they determined it was more a nuisance than it was a benefit. And of course, we know what's happened in parts of the United States where species have been brought in that were not really supposed to be here, and how they took over. And so now, if you go walking through the Everglades, you may end up in the belly of a great big old snake that's not supposed to be there anyhow, instead of getting eaten by alligator, because snake eats alligators and all their eggs, see. So those things can certainly happen to cause individual species to become extinct for sure. Number 3, on day 5 of creation week, God designed all the creatures that fly and all the creatures that swim. They didn't appear on earth by accident, just as Daniel has brought to our attention. This wasn't just a happy coincidence. Oh, we got water now. I know there's going to be something that can swim in there. Note that God created more than just birds and just fish on day 5. Now, what distinction are they making there? There's some things that swim that are not fish. There's some things that fly that are not birds. I mean, you could say that man flies. Of course, he's in an airplane when he does it. And there have been a few people that tried to fly with a wingsuit and ended up hitting the side of a wall somewhere and didn't turn out real good. But what the record says is that God made flying things, including various insects that we classify as insects that would fly. Bats, we don't call a bat a bird, but they fly nonetheless. He also made aquatic creatures, which encompass more than what we would classify as fish today. Is a whale a fish? No, it's not. What is a whale? It's a mammal, see? And of course, according to evolutionary theory, we're kin to whales because we're both mammals. Now, if that makes sense to you, then I'm sorry. Obviously, you don't have a very good understanding of the worth of human life. You put it on the level as a whale. So you'd feel real sorry if a whale's being killed for its blubber, and that's a great-great-grandparent of yours, all the way back there many years ago. Sort of silly, isn't it? Remember this, kinds only come from the what? From the same kinds. This is called the law of biogenesis, which says living things always come from living things, and living things produce more living things like themselves. This law of science has proven to be true all the time. There are no exceptions. And of course, that's a clear deviation from what a theory is. Kinds produce after their kind. And that should settle it. But according to evolution, that's not so. Kinds can change to other kinds. And that's the whole reason why you can talk about the origin of the species and the survival of the fittest and all that, is when you're taking the notion that time allows for something that's different to become something that arrives and is the same today, even though yesterday it was something different than that. Kinds produce after their kinds. And we understand that. You go to the co-op and you get a little package of corn seed. You do not ever expect it to be anything other than corn. And if it ends up being something other than corn, then obviously you didn't plant corn seed. May have been in the wrong package, but if you plant corn, you're going to get corn. Plant tomatoes, you're going to get tomatoes. Dogs have dogs. Cats have cats. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it'll always be. And the whole position and the whole reason that the opposite is promoted is that we simply haven't found any of those transitional forms. We know they're there. We know there's all these half one thing and half another, but we just never have uncovered one. Yes, sir, Victor.
I always think about, you know, if you look at the Kennel Club and their list of all the different kinds of dogs, those all came from one set of dogs.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But breeding over time produced all these different kind of dogs that you see now. Same thing happens in nature when some dogs or something, they get isolated in one area. Those traits that they have are going to be passed on just and going to keep, you know, magnifying over time.
exactly.
Of that dog. That's why that dog in that area looks different than a dog over here.
That's right.
Or something. But it's just funny to me. You got all those kinds that come from that. You can understand that, but you can't understand. They want to call it evolution instead of adaptation.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, still a dog. You start with the first pair, and you go 2 million breeds down the line, you still got a dog. You don't have anything else other than a dog being produced by 2 dogs. And we understand that to be the case. But for some reason, and of course it's supposedly to provide footing for evolution, if there's enough time involved, then you got cats turned into dogs, or frogs turned into turtles, or whales turned into human beings. Just enough time. No, remember that little example from the beginning. At some point in time, if evolution's true, then there had to have been a non-human mama giving birth to a human baby. Well, you don't realize, big and I don't care. At some point in time, that had to happen. And then the sad thing is that mama, that baby that was born had to find somebody that happened to be hatching at the same time too. Reckon how far he had to travel. Reckon had communication line. Hey, here's Mrs. Gorilla here. I just had a human. Do you know anybody else having humans today? We need to see if we can set them up and get married. Yes, Linda.
I remember growing up, we'd go over to the pond and we'd see tadpoles. Well, frogs that laid eggs and they're little bitty things. And then we'd watch them and they'd grow legs and get bigger and before you knew it, you had frogs.
Exactly.
They were frogs come from a frog.
Exactly.
There were tadpoles come from a frog that went back to a frog.
And the sad thing is back at a period of time in which there was less industrialization and people were more on farms than they presently are, and were able to observe nature right there, and it's taking place every day on the farm, then you have a hard time convincing those people that have experienced just exactly how the universe works to convince them that this just happened. You know, isn't it amazing how chance turned out so good for us? And that we don't have to deal with any of these half one thing and half something else. And so it almost makes you want to go back to that time where you're not having pumped into your brain an anti-God false theory that, just as Daniel said a few minutes ago, takes purpose completely out of the equation. If we are nothing more than educated apes, we are wasting our time being here today. We're wasting our time reading the Bible. We're wasting our time trying to do anything that we would classify as being good, because if there is no God, there ain't no such thing as objective good. There's no such thing as objective bad. We then go back to the law of the jungle, and if I happen to be the biggest and the baddest, then I can get my will done, and if you don't like it, I can kill you, and then somebody bigger and badder than me can kill me and get his stuff done. But that's not human life. That's what some people wish it was, because they think they're the biggest and the baddest, but I guarantee you can find somebody bigger and badder than you and has a worse temper than you do. You might have to go out of the county, but you can find somebody, and the pecking order will be established that way. Or we could see the example of Jesus and pattern ourselves after him and live in hope of eternity someday. And of course, that's the ideal thing. But that's hard. It's easier just to think of yourself as nothing more than an educated ape, and who would expect anything beneficial out of an educated ape anyhow? Of course, nothing. All right. Anybody got anything else on that? Now, the rest of the material I handed out on the sheet had to do with common sense miracles in the apparent age of earth, okay? So this is simply an article written by Eric Lyons. It's a fairly old article from August 2011, which doesn't seem like it's that long ago, but we've got a whole bunch of kids here that's been born since then for sure. And he does a good, in a very short period of time, he does a lot of explaining as to some of the problems that people would have, such as, well, how can it be that here are these stars that are millions and billions of light years away, but we're just now seeing them? So that means of necessity, since we're seeing a star that's that far away, then the universe has to be at least that old, or we wouldn't be seeing the star. Which leads to the question, what stars could you see right after the creation of the stars? Now, when you start looking at the expanse of the universe, if there's anything more awe-inspiring than that, I don't know what it is. When you start thinking about how big, and then probably one of the things that is true as well that shocks you, at least it shocked me, was how that if you go in the other direction into smallness, you go from the expanse of the universe, and then you go down to the very elements and the building blocks of this whole universe, and you go back into the human body and all of that. Have you ever heard anybody say you got to have good gut health? I've even got some stuff that me and Tanya put together that try to drink 2 ounces of it every day to have good gut health. What does that mean? You got stuff that's growing in your gut. You got alive creatures that are growing in your body, and they're good for you. Now, the bad thing is sometimes there's some not so good creatures growing in your belly too. Well, that's bad. So you need to have the good, and more the better, and less or hopefully none of the bad. That's going to be hard too. And so there's this battle going on in our bodies all the time by things that are at the very opposite extreme of the universe in its largeness. That too, of course, speaks to a design. How'd that happen? I read if you ever get a chance, there's a debate that Brother J.D. Bales debated with an atheist by the name of Teller, T-E-L-L-E-R. And in that debate, Teller says it's obvious from just looking at the human body that it's an accident. It's not any God that had any sense at all would not have designed the human body like it is. And of course, Brother Bales says, how's that the case? And he said, well, just look. You put a nose over a mouth, and the nose is always dripping. That's the wrong place to put a mouth. And as many operations and surgeries as we have to have, if God was God, then he'd have put us a zipper instead of closed skin so that we could just unzip ourselves. And Brother Bales responded, you know good and well, if God made man with a zipper, little boys would lose their guts every day. Which is a pretty good explanation. So God knew what he was doing. He made man just as he wanted man to be, and I guess he knew in the future there would be people who would deny his existence. That's why he would inspire David to write, the fool has said in his heart there is no God. Because if a person does not have the gumption to examine the evidence for a young earth, and we'll get into this more next week and the following week, then they simply are prejudiced against the information. And what's so sad is that the so-called educated world has only fairly recently become anti-God, anti the supernatural in the Bible, and promoting any such thing as a Big Bang or an evolutionary explanation of things. I mean, think of all the years that existed before there was any such person as Charles Darwin. You know, in the material from Apologetics Press, there's an article that Cal Butt authors concerning Scientific American back in 2011. There was an article that was written by some evolutionist and said, be quiet. Don't let the creationists know that we don't have a clue as to how life began. And that was an article. Now, why would they want to keep quiet about that? Well, they don't want people to know. They can't explain where life came from. All they can come up with fanciful theories that in reality contradict the established facts of science. So we'll take our stand where God explains it. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
So I was watching that documentary on volcanoes one day, and one of the scientists, it was perfect and everything until he said, well, it's ought to know that humans came from volcanic ash. And I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've seen some hot people for sure. Yeah, I'm not sure it was that kind of hot, but isn't that amazing? You know, as far back as I can remember in a science class, Louis Pasteur proved that if you threw some dirty socks and underwear in the corner, you would not produce rats. And yet there were people who thought that that's what happened. You had dirty clothes, then presto change-o, out of the dirt and non-life came living rodents. But that's not the case. That's called spontaneous generation. There ain't no such thing as spontaneous generation. And yet that's the very thing that has to take place in order for evolution to be true. Something has to come from nothing. Non-life has to give birth to life. That can't happen. How scientific is that, folks? Well, that was dispelled and disproved by the originator of Listerine. You know, I think they used his name when they invented Listerine because of his work in that area. If you have a clean, perfectly clean surface, there's not anything going to come growing in that if it's perfectly clean. If there's nothing in there, there's still going to be nothing. But we're supposed to believe that out of nothing came everything, and it didn't have anything to do with an intelligent designer that we know to be God. Anything else?
Freddie, I was thinking, what kind of tells me, you know, God, he made the life first. God said, let there be life. And then he made he separated the water from the land, and then he made all the fruit trees and the grass and all that stuff. And then he made man. These, whatever you call them, they just made the big thing, made the life first.
Yeah.
When or what, you know.
Yeah, there was, as Daniel said, there's a purpose and a plan for all. It wasn't said, oh boy, we can actually eat this stuff. No, that was why it's created, you know. So the sensible, reasonable, rational, logical explanation has to be taken above the fanciful theory without evidence every time. And that's all we want people to do, is just examine evidence. I mean, we expect them to do that relative to the plan of salvation, God's purpose for man here upon this earth. We want people to be reasonable and rational. Does not John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31 tell us, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written, that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. So John says there, here's why this book exists. It's to provide evidence to lead to the conclusion that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. You believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God not because you feel a certain way in the pit of your stomach. You believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God because you've examined the evidence and it leads you to that conclusion. Thank you so much. I heard the bell ring.